lightsaber crystals were deeply connected to the Force, allowing the wielder of the blade to become deeply binded to it, almost in a symbiotic way. This connection to the Force also allowed for some unique properties. Kyber crystals didn't just channel and focus energy, they amplified it. This is what allowed them to be used as the heart of a lightsaber, or as a weapon of mass destruction, making these crystals highly sought after. Kyber crystals from Illum were not the only kind of lightsaber crystal. As Luke Skywalker once pointed out, the flexibility and practicality of the lightsaber design meant that pretty much any crystal could be used to focus the beam of raw energy. However, some crystals were far more sought after than others, largely due to the unique powers and properties of these rare lightsabers. Some crystals increased the heat of the blade, some granted the wielder additional powers, while others would increase the power of the user 1,000-fold. In this video, we will discuss every single lightsaber crystal type from both canon and legends. As I did with the previous videos in this series, this video is vaguely ranked, this time from least to most powerful. So make sure to stick about to the end of the video to learn about the rarest and most powerful lightsaber crystals. We'll be exploring just over 60 lightsaber crystals today, and I think this is the most comprehensive video about lightsaber crystal types here on YouTube. So you'll probably want to grab a drink and a snack, as this will be one of my longer videos. This video also marks the start of my very first lightsaber giveaway. I'll be giving away a saber of your choice from VF Saber's Essential Collection, which I'll leave a link to down in the description. All you have to do to enter is like this video and subscribe with notifications on. You also have to tell me what your ideal lightsaber would look like down in the comment section of any of my next 15 videos. Myself and some of my mates will be picking our favourite lightsaber idea as the winner, so make sure to be as detailed as possible. I've commented my ideal lightsaber design down below to give you guys some ideas. Best of luck everyone, and may the Force be with you. Anyway, back to the video. There are quite a few differences between canon and legends when it comes to lightsaber crystals. In canon, Kyber crystals were clear until they were attuned to the user. After the wielder had bonded with the Kyber crystal, it would take on one of the myriad of different lightsaber colours, which we explored the meanings of in this video. However, in Legends, the lightsaber crystal already had its coloration and was simply chosen by the wielder. But just bear in mind for this video that there are some differences between canon, newer Legends and older Legends lightsaber crystals, which can lead to a few confusing inconsistencies. Many of the lightsaber crystals are also from computer games, such as Star Wars Galaxies and The Force Unleashed. At times, they can be pretty wacky and unique, such as the lightsaber crystal that would simultaneously freeze and burn opponents, that we will discuss in a bit. My headcanon is that these crystals got many of their insane powers through the Force, similar to Sith alchemy, but just bear in mind that some Legends crystals' powers often don't make a lot of sense, especially when compared to the new canon Kyber crystals. First, we will start with the weakest lightsaber crystals, which were most often used in training lightsabers. These crystals could not focus the blade's energy as well as other lightsaber crystals on this list, and thus would produce a blade that would sting or stun rather than maim or cut. There were a few crystals that could be used in this type of blade. The first were Bondar crystals, found only in the far orbit of the Alderaan system. The weakest and most common form of the Adegan crystals could also be used, but we'll talk about them a bit more in just a moment. First, we must talk about some of the lightsaber crystals that were worse than a regular Kyber crystal that one could find on planets such as Illum. One example of this would be the lightsaber crystal used by the Dagi Jedi. This blade was zigzagged in shape, was coloured black and silver while emitting a turquoise aura. Although it looks pretty cool, the shape of the blade was likely quite inconvenient for dueling. It may have been more of a ceremonial blade. Therefore, I've placed this crystal towards the bottom in terms of power, even though I believe it to be one of the most unique looking sabers. Moving on from one of the rarest crystals, we will now discuss one of the most common. The most abundant lightsaber crystal was of course the Illum Kyber crystal. Illum was incredibly sacred to the Jedi. This planet had been owned and protected by the Jedi for thousands of years, with the majority of Jedi receiving their lightsaber crystal from this planet. It was so common to receive one's lightsaber crystal from this planet that many believed it was the only source of Kyber crystals in the entire galaxy. Most of these Kyber crystals were usually pretty unremarkable, but were very dependable. Although unremarkable, this doesn't mean they were not high quality, hence why the Jedi used them so frequently. In many ways, they were the jack of all trades of lightsaber crystals. They did not have any special abilities, but were found in abundance, were high quality, and had a strong affinity for the Force, meaning they made up the vast majority of Jedi lightsabers. Another common and largely unremarkable lightsaber crystal were Adigan crystals. Although nowhere near as common as Illum crystals, they were still used relatively frequently. These crystals were mainly found on the Adiga system, although they could also be found on Halm and Magito. Adigan crystals could be broken down into 5 subtypes. The most common form of Adigan crystals was the Catharacite crystal. These, along with Relicite and Dantite, were considered to be some of the weakest Adigan crystals, as they didn't focus energy as well as their rarer cousins, only producing a weak stinging sensation. This meant they were usually reserved for training lightsabers. Next, we have Mephite, the Adigan crystal most commonly used by the Jedi Order. They were very similar in structure and quality to the crystals found on Illum. In fact, in early Legends content, no distinction was made between Illum crystals and these kind of Adigan crystals, suggesting they were pretty much the same thing. The rarest form of Adigan crystal was the Pontite crystal. These were highly sought after, largely due to their unique properties. It was said that these crystals were cold to touch, and some even speculated that the blade itself burns cold, although I could find no information that backed up this claim. What is known is that it emitted a calming aura. This was particularly useful for users of the light side of the Force, allowing them to maintain a stronger connection to the light side of the Force and therefore an edge in combat. Next, we will explore the lightsaber crystals of the Sith. We will begin with Star Wars canon. As Sith in canon could not bond with Kybers due to the crystal's innate pull to the light side, Darksiders were forced to bleed their crystals. The Darksider would pour all of their hatred into the crystal, causing it to turn red and corrupting it to the dark side. However, this process was reversible, with Ahsoka Tano purifying a pair of bled Kyber crystals, causing them to turn white in colour. So far, it has not been revealed whether bled or purified lightsaber crystals differed in power to regular Kyber crystals. Next, we have the Legends explanation for red Sith crystals. Just like in canon, lightsaber crystals were almost always connected to the light side of the Force. The early Sith were therefore forced to acquire the crystals for their lightsabers in other ways. The most popular way of doing so was by creating synthetic lightsaber crystals. These were created through the use of giant forges as well as the dark side. These crystals produced a slightly more powerful blade than a standard Kyber crystal, and were usually red in coloration. They were also usually highly attuned to the dark side, although it is known that they could be green in colour while also being attuned to the light, as was the case with Luke's second lightsaber. It was known that on very rare occasions, the extra power of the synthetic crystals could cause regular lightsabers to short out, a frightening prospect for Jedi in the heat of battle. These crystals were also very versatile and could be imbued with a variety of different powers and effects. One subgroup of synthetic lightsaber crystals were condensed energy crystals, but we will discuss these in more depth throughout this video. The dark side energies imbued into synthetic crystals could make them unstable, causing them to crackle and spark with energy. This often required some kind of vent to prevent the lightsaber from overloading, often taking the form of a crossguard lightsaber. This was also the case in Star Wars canon. If the bleeding process failed, this could cause the crystal to become cracked, leading to an intense and unstable blade, as was the case with Kylo Ren's blade. Next, we have another categorization of lightsaber crystals. These were usually no more powerful than your standard Illum lightsaber crystal, but had one crucial difference. They could only bond to one user. This included the incredibly rare brown-coloured crystal Bandara's Folly, as well as the Kenobi's Legacy crystal. Another crystal of this type was Benara's Sacrifice, a one-of-a-kind crystal that also emitted a brown blade. Although the lore does not state exactly how these crystals prevented others from wielding them, I would imagine they simply turned off if picked up by someone other than the user they are bonded to. Other lightsabers of this type would turn on, but emitted an electrical discharge that would prevent anyone but the true user from effectively wielding it. This was the case with Bane's Heart, a lightsaber crystal gifted by Darth Bane to his apprentice Darth Xana. It was also the crystal used by the reanimated dead body of General Grievous, known as NK Necrosis. I'll be making a video on this creepy abomination very soon, so make sure to subscribe and turn notifications on for that video. Another category is what I like to call the baller lightsaber crystals. These lightsaber crystals were incredibly expensive, often costing the same as a small planetoid. The first was the Coruscant gem. These beautiful gems were said to refract light so that it looked as though a star was burning within them. In fact, the planet Neutron, the home planet of humanity, was renamed Coruscant, as it was said its many cities resembled the Coruscant gems when viewed from space. The blade produced by the Coruscant gem was said to be more powerful than a regular saber, with Lando Calrissian remarking that they can slice through transparent steel like a laser goes through Sicilian jam. Another rather expensive crystal was the Durian Fire crystal. These crystals produced a rare silvery white blade, but were not known to be any more powerful than a regular Kyber crystal from Illum. Interestingly, the Empire used the sale of these rare crystals to finance much of the Death Star project. However, despite their high price tag, these crystals were very common, albeit only on the planet of Tatooine. In fact, the Jawas used these crystals to make the glowing red and yellow lenses that protected their eyes. However, due to Tatooine's remoteness, no one knew the true value of these gems and believed them to be worthless. Ultima pearls were another type of crystal within this category. These silvery pearls were found deep within the oceans of the planet Dak and were incredibly expensive. They were known to be very difficult to install into a lightsaber, with the only known use of this lightsaber crystal being the Force-sensitive niece of Admiral Akbar. Another incredibly rare stone that could be used within a lightsaber was the Rainbow Gem. Just one of these gems was said to be as expensive as a Mon Calamari cruiser, and it produced an elegant turquoise blade. The only other known crystal of this colour was the one-of-a-kind Sunrider's Destiny crystal. It is not known if either of these crystals had any additional powers, although they are both known to be highly attuned to the Force. The most well-known lightsaber crystal of this type was the Krayt Dragon Pearl. As we saw in Season 2 of The Mandalorian, these pearls could only be obtained by successfully slaying a Krayt Dragon. These crystals aided the creature to digest its food, similar to dinosaurs in the real world. Obtaining a Krayt Dragon Pearl was seen as a great victory, especially amongst the Tusken Raiders and monster hunters. As these pearls were made from Kyber, they could be used to construct a lightsaber, although they were notoriously difficult to install. However, when activated, they emitted a very powerful blade that howled when ignited. Another strange but rare crystal was the Lambent Germ. These were basically genetic monstrosities created by the Yuzong Vong to aid them with their takeover of the galaxy. These crystals had several uses. First, they could bond with other creatures telepathically. This allowed the user to dim or brighten the crystals at will, which could then be used as a means of communication across vast distances. They also allowed whoever was bonded to them to sense other Yuzong Vong around them. Jacen Solo used a Lambent Gem in his lightsaber during the Yuzong Vong War, allowing him to sense these strange extragalactic beings from a distance. Next, we have a more common lightsaber crystal, the Dantari crystal. Now, these crystals were in fact the main source of the Jedi's lightsaber crystals before the discovery of Illum. They could be found within the eggs of the native Kinrath, and just like Canon Kyber crystals, changed colour depending upon the Force alignment of the user. These crystals could pretty much come in any colour, although they were most commonly found to be red, blue or green. These crystals had an added advantage that regular Kyber crystals did not contain. During battle, the Dantari crystals could recycle the fury of battle, allowing the wielder to replenish their Force energies much faster. It is believed that the purple crystal within Darth Revan's lightsaber was in fact a Dantari crystal. Another well-known purple lightsaber crystal was the Huracan crystal, most famously used by Mace Windu. These crystals could only be found on the planet of Huracan, and were collected by a strange race of stone people. After receiving visions of this crystal, Windu travelled to this planet, but was soon confronted by the natives. Using his Jedi abilities, he killed one of these creatures. However, he immediately regretted it, realising that with great power came great responsibility. He then used the Force to rebuild this stone being. Grateful, they gifted him one of these purple crystals. It is said that these crystals were particularly good at quickening one's reflexes and connecting to the Force, allowing the wielder to better penetrate opponents' defenses. A crystal that would have been incredibly useful during the Clone Wars was the Luxum crystal. Formed from the dark energies present upon the planet Ambria, these crystals imbued the blade with ionizing properties. This meant that anything struck with the blade would receive an electric shock, a particularly useful property if you're regularly striking down clankers. The thicker-end crystal was very similar, although it was slightly more powerful. However, it could only be used by users of the dark side, and was famously used by the Lord of Hate, Tulak Horde. A rare lightsaber of unknown origin was the lightsaber crystal used in the Darksaber. It is completely unknown why it is coloured this way, or where it was originally found. As we explored in the last video in this lightsaber lore series, there is speculation that the Darksaber is more powerful than a regular lightsaber, although whether this was due to the unique crystal or the shape of the blade is very much up for debate. Another black coloured saber was the Blackwing Saber, one of my favourite lightsaber crystals which I've discussed a few times in previous videos. The Blackwing Saber was effectively an infected Kyber crystal. Many years before the Clone Wars, the Sith tried to find a cure for death, engineering a virus through science, Sith alchemy, and the dark side of the Force. While this virus did grant immortality, it effectively made the victim a zombie and a slave to the Blackwing hive mind. This sickness was incredibly infectious and could spread to any living being, including the semi-living Kyber crystals. After the virus was accidentally released again during the Imperial era, vast swathes of Dathomir became infected. The Kyber crystals within the Dathomiri quarantine zone became black in coloration as the virus corrupted the crystal. These crystals could be used in a lightsaber and produced a black blade, although plumes of smoke would bellow from the lightsaber hilt. Unfortunately, it is not known whether this blade had any extraordinary abilities, although it is likely the crystal contained within could act as a vessel for further spread of the Blackwing virus. Next, we have the Loredan Germ, a form of synthetic lightsaber crystal. These gems were originally produced by the Loridians, an enslaved species that were forbidden from speaking. They developed these gems as a means of communicating kinetically, allowing them to very accurately understand subtle changes in posture, mood, and body language. The Force sensitives of this slave race eventually imbued these gems with the Force. This allowed any wielder to better understand their opponent's actions, greatly improving the user's defensive capabilities. Next, we have the Demind Crystal. These dark side crystals were often used by the Sith with a larger stature. This was because the crystal greatly increased the length and girth of the blade, similar to the Great Saber discussed in the last video, as well as being particularly useful for larger species. These crystals were popular with users of more defensive forms, due to its ease of use during blast deflection. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Rubot and Velmorite crystals. Velmorite crystals were used in a wide range of energy-based equipment. When placed in a lightsaber, it produced a thin and fluid blade, famed for its grace. Rubat crystals focused the blade to a sharp point, allowing for more precise strikes. These crystals were very popular in the early days of the Jedi Order, before the discovery of Illum. Although their popularity would fade over time, they were still admired for their ability to increase the wielder's focus, agility, and speed, even during the days of the post-Imperial era. However, Rubat crystals were far from the only crystals that provided the wielder with greater clarity of mind during combat. In fact, there was a whole subgroup of lightsaber crystals known as focus crystals. These were usually associated with the light side of the Force. The most famous of these was the Solari crystal. This produced an orange blade and was said to be one of the oldest lightsaber crystals in the entire galaxy, dating back to the beginning of the Jedi Order. However, this crystal did have one drawback. If the user wavered from the light side for just 1 second, the lightsaber blade would extinguish, meaning it could only be used by Jedi with the purest of hearts. A similar but less rare focus crystal was used by Ki-Adi-Mundi's species to clear the mind during meditation. Known as the Kasha crystal, the Serians found a way to actually dramatically increase the power of this crystal. Using the Force, they scribed patterns and markings onto the crystal. This allowed the crystal to better focus the Force, therefore increasing its power. These meditation crystals worked effectively as lightsabers, instilling a meditative calmness into the user during battle. Another similar crystal was the Meditation Crystal. These crystals grew naturally upon the Jedi Order's homeworld of Tython. Just like the Kasha crystal and other focused crystals, they provided the wielder with a closer connection to the Force. both within and outside the lightsaber. They also allowed the user to regain spent force energies during battle. Whenever the blade struck another opponent, force energies would be regained, allowing the wielder to fight for longer and better utilize the force in a long and drawn-out duel. We will now move on to a category of crystals that were said to increase the heat and intensity of the blade. These crystals were often infused with the dark side, but were sometimes naturally attuned to the light. Some of these crystals, such as the next door crystal, were highly volatile, so while it granted additional power, they often came with increased risk to the user. As we explored in the last video in this series, the Lightsaber Crystal of Exar Kun was one such example. This lightsaber was heavily augmented with dark side alchemy and magic, similar to some of the Dathomiri crystals we will discuss later on. These spells increased the blade's heat significantly. In fact, it was so powerful it could cut through Mandalorian Beskar armor as though it were mere paper. It is possible that Exar's blade was made of lignanor, a rare crystal that dramatically increased the heat intensity of the blade with its strong connection to the dark side. This dark side potential could also enhance the user's own Sith abilities, much like Exar Kun's lightsaber. However, naturally occurring crystals with similar properties were often significantly less powerful than Exar's blade. Examples of this were the Sigil and Fon crystals. Despite the fact they didn't increase the blade's temperature as much as other crystals, it was still pretty impressive, with many ancient Sith and Jedi going to great lengths to obtain such a crystal. Another crystal that increased the power and heat of the blade was the Quixoni crystal. These crystals were forged in the cores of exploding supernova, imbuing them with immense energy. Not only did this dramatically increase the potency and heat of the blade, it also increased its force potential, allowing the wielder to amplify their power in the Force. Some lightsaber crystals had more humble origins. The Sapith crystal was pooped out by the Sapith worm, creating a blade that was simultaneously more powerful than a regular saber, while also being much easier to control. Orpilla crystals also increased the heat intensity of the blade. When these crystals were refined and cleaned, they became known as Jenrux crystals. As well as increasing the heat of the blade, they could also imbue the wielder with added agility, similar to force speed seen in the Phantom Menace. Another similar but slightly different lightsaber crystal was the Barab ingot. These crystals were found on the irradiated planet of Barab 1. This radiation fundamentally changed the properties of the crystal. These irradiated crystals usually produced a clear blade, but this was not what made them so remarkable. The sheer amount of energy emitted from the blade caused the plasma to lose its cohesion, causing it to burn more like fire. The heat and flame-like properties of the blade meant that any poor unfortunate soul who was struck with it would instantly catch fire. The incineration crystal used by Starkiller was very similar. Incineration crystals were part of a wider crystal classification known as compressed energy crystals, a variation of the synthetic Kyber crystal. The blades they produced were thinner than a regular saber and pulsated slightly. They also usually had unique properties and powers that differed from a regular saber. The incineration crystal was probably the most famous and was known to cause victims to spontaneously combust. Another compressed energy crystal, known as the corrosion crystal, produced a blade that was highly reactive with flesh, causing the victim's body to literally corrode away as though it had been drenched in acid. Next, we have a very rare and strange group of lightsaber crystals. These included the aforementioned Kenobi crystal, Bar's wisdom crystal, as well as the permafrost crystal from the planet Hoth. Although they could still produce a blade of immense heat that could cut through things as well as an ordinary saber, they were imbued with a unique power. The blade could absorb the thermal energy of those it struck, leaving parts of their body frozen with frostbite. Thus, the blade would simultaneously burn hot and cold at the same time. How this actually worked is unknown and not explained in detail within the lore. But I don't know about you, but being burned, sliced and frozen at the same time sounds like a pretty horrific way to go. Next, we have the Ankaris Sapphire, a legendary crystal. This lightsaber crystal was heavily attuned to the light. In fact, it was said that any dark side user who touched it would immediately suffer third-degree burns. It was also said to aid the user in battle by strengthening their connection to the light side, bolstering their courage and focus. It could also significantly boost the Force healing ability, allowing them to heal the wounds of themselves and others. Next, we will move on to some lightsaber crystals with unique properties that were said to have been created by the founder of the Witches of Dathomir. The Witches of Dathomir were founded by the rogue Jedi, Orya, who taught the native Dathomiri how to use more mystical parts of the Force as well as how to ride Rancors. If you want me to make a more detailed video explaining the Witches of Dathomir's origins, then let me know down below. The first lightsaber crystal was Alya's Exile. This crystal produced an incredibly potent scarlet blade, which was extraordinarily hot, perhaps producing the hottest blade of any lightsaber crystal in this video. In fact, this saber emitted so much heat it could burn opponents from a short distance away, meaning the wielder could inflict damage without actually landing a direct strike. The second was Alya's Redemption. This lightsaber crystal was imbued with Night Sister magic. This meant that anyone who struck with it would not just suffer the severe heat of a lightsaber, but also a corrosive acidic effect. If this wasn't bad enough already, the wounded individual would be slowly consumed by venom, meaning even minor injuries from the blade could be lethal. Next, we have the dreaded Vexil Crystal from the Force Unleashed. These darkside crystals were imbued with the little-known darkside power known as Force Plague. This meant that even minor wounds from a saber that used the Vexil Crystal could be extremely fatal. The wound would gradually become infected with a lethal darkside-induced disease. It worked very much like a fast-acting toxin, exhausting the victim and clouding their mind. If not immediately treated by a powerful Force healer, a wound from a Vexil Crystal lightsaber would most often be fatal. Amplification crystals are, in my opinion, some of the most useful crystals in Star Wars. These crystals could be used in conjunction with any other crystal to dramatically increase its power, so the previously mentioned Vexil Crystal would become significantly more lethal, while a regular lightsaber crystal would increase in heat intensity significantly. These crystals produced a unique silver blade, one of the only lightsabers of this color. These crystals were most famously used by Maulkiller, a darkside abomination created by Darth Vader. Maulkiller was designed to be the perfect assassin, and utilized the DNA of both Darth Maul and Starkiller, although the discrepancies between the two genetic templates eventually caused insanity, leading to the death of Maulkiller, although that's a story for another day. Another crystal that amplified the power of other stones within the blade was the Heart of the Guardian crystal. The Heart of the Guardian was very ancient, and was said to be some way involved in the creation of both the Jedi and the Sith. The Jedi believed that in their greatest time of need, this crystal would appear and help bring salvation to the galaxy. However, the Sith believed that when the Heart of the Guardian appeared, it would bring about their domination of the galaxy. Therefore, it is pretty fitting that this crystal was most likely utilized by Revan, one of the greatest Jedi and Sith of all time. As well as amplifying the powers of other crystals, it also increased the speed of the wielder significantly, greatly aiding them in combat. The Mantle of the Force was another ancient lightsaber crystal sought by Revan. This had many of the same abilities as the Heart of the Guardian, most notably its ability to increase the power of other lightsaber crystals. However, in many ways, this crystal was superior. Not only did the Mantle of the Force increase the power of other crystals, it also increased the Force powers of the wielder by strengthening their connection to the Force, allowing the user to fight harder and for longer. Next up, we have the Dragite Crystal. These sought-after crystals produced a similar blade to a regular Kyber crystal. However, instead of a low hum, they produced a deafening roar. In fact, when a Dragite blade struck another lightsaber, it produced a miniature sonic boom with enough strength to physically injure an opponent or, at the very least, knock the lightsaber out of their hand. However, this could also injure the wielder, so it could be very risky to use if the correct precautions were not utilized. Another similar crystal was the Atan Kyber. Similar to Dragite, Atan crystals could unleash a blast of energy that could knock an opponent's blade from their hands. However, instead of a blast of sonic energy, it was more like a sudden burst of heat and kinetic energy. This also had additional benefits. If deflecting blaster fire, the returning bolt would be imbued with additional energy, causing a small explosion upon impact. The Impact Condensed Energy Crystal held similar properties. These yellow-coloured crystals were utilised by Galen Marek to great effect. They would be pretty useful against heavily armoured opponents. For example, a Mandalorian with Beskar armour may be impervious to the lightsaber blade itself, but would not be immune to the effects of the Impact Crystal. The Impact Crystal would effectively make the lightsaber into a baseball bat, making it incredibly difficult for opponents to block attacks effectively, and could even cause damage to internal organs or circuitry through sheer concussive force. Next, we have another one of my favourites, the Lava Lightsaber, a saber we spoke about briefly during the previous video in this series. At first glance, they would appear to be the same as an ordinary single-bladed lightsaber. However, it contained a very rare lightsaber crystal known as a lava crystal that could only be found in the deepest depths of volcanic planets. These crystals fundamentally changed the properties of the lightsaber blade. Instead of near weightless plasma, the blade was heavy and dense, similar in consistency to lava. In fact, the blade would emit fire and spit bits of lava from the blade, making it even more deadly during a lightsaber duel. The cumbersome nature of the blade, as well as the spitting lava, made these incredibly difficult and dangerous to wield. Only cybernetic abominations such as Darth Vader could use such a blade, and even he opted to use a regular blade due to the lava lightsaber's added weight. The Illum crystals of the planet Arai were particularly unique. Instead of emitting a coloured plasma blade, it was instead completely transparent, with many of my fellow YouTubers often dubbing it the invisible lightsaber. This had some obvious advantages, most notably the extreme confusion it would cause opponents. I would imagine that this crystal would be extremely useful when used in a curved or double-bladed lightsaber. The Ghostfire crystal was very similar, also having a clear or almost transparent blade. However, the Ghostfire saber was even more disorientating than the Illum crystal. Not only did it produce almost no sound, it also produced illusory aftereffects from the blade. This meant it was almost impossible to actually work out where the blade actually was. In the hands of a competent lightsaber duelist, the Ghostfire crystal was certainly one of the most dangerous crystals on this list. Next, we have the Cataract crystal, a dark side crystal of unknown origins. The crystal's dark side energies imbued the blade with the Force Drain ability, an ability strongly associated with Darth Nihilus. This allowed the wielder to slowly drain the life force of those within his vicinity, using these nourishing life energies to heal wounds and replenish energy. This saber's force drain would eventually be fatal, although it would take a significant amount of time. The penultimate lightsaber crystal on this list is the Stigium lightsaber crystal. These crystals were so powerful they were actually banned by the Galactic Republic. These crystals warped the perceptions of reality around them, effectively making the user invisible both to the naked eye and all kinds of scanners, especially when they were used with the Force Stealth ability. They could also be used to cloak starships and other forms of advanced weaponry. The Phantom TIE Fighter, Maul's Scimitar, and Starkiller's Rogue Shadow all use cloaking devices that utilize these crystals. Although these crystals found heavy usage during the early days of the Republic, they caused significant trouble, which resulted in them being banned. Although very powerful, they were actually one of the most common lightsaber crystals in the galaxy. After the Imperial superweapon, the Tarkin, blew open the planet of Aten II, it was found the entire core was made from these crystals. They could also be found elsewhere, and it is known that at least one invisible island made entirely of these crystals did exist. However, despite their relative abundance, the fact that they were invisible made them almost impossible to locate and mine, therefore ensuring they were very difficult to obtain. And now we have the most powerful lightsaber crystal of them all, and I'm sure many of you would probably have guessed which one I'm going to say by now. The Kyber crystal was an ancient relic, created by some kind of powerful force being, most likely a celestial. Luke Skywalker believed it to be the most powerful lightsaber crystal in existence, and for a good reason. Just a tiny sliver of this crystal could dramatically increase the wielder's force potential. If a force user acquired the entire crystal, this would have dramatic effects. If in the presence of a force nexus, it could increase the powers of the force wielder 1,000-fold. It was so powerful that when Vader utilized the gem, he was able to use a variation of force lightning, known as kinetite, without it damaging his cybernetic suit. If it was taken away from a force nexus, its power would dramatically decrease. However, it was still regarded as the most powerful lightsaber crystal in the entire galaxy. If you enjoyed this video on all the powers of lightsaber crystals explained, then check out this video on all 13 force lightning abilities. Or if you've watched that already, check out the rest of the lightsaber lore series here.